I'm gonna have to cut these rack sleeves. That's what goes into the rubber bushings on the rack right there. And that's because I'm using the Maxim Motorsports aluminum rack bushings and Jan Duncan spacer, rack spacer kit. If you're keeping like polyurethane or the factory stuff, then you won't have to do this. But if you're running the solid mount kit, then you will. And per their instructions, you're going to be cutting this sleeve pretty much flush with the K-member. They say back like a 1/16 of an inch. They want it back just a little bit. So the thickness of this metal, they want it sitting just inside of there, which, you know, that can be a little bit tricky. But I say cut it flush and then just grind a little bit off of it. And I'm going to try some different ways of doing this. For one, you need to make sure there's no gap here. If there's a gap here, you cut this and you put it in, it's going to be too short. So you might have to twist it. And when you put it in there and turn it, you can kind of see where it likes to sit. Like right there, everything is flush, there's no gap, it actually feels tight. And then what I'm going to do is keep the bolt in there and tighten this up. Now I know that it's not going to go anywhere, and it is tightened up against the back of the K-member, how it would be when it's installed. And next, what they want you to do, is take a pick or something and scribe a line around here. Of course, that's so you have a line to cut it. I thought about maybe trying just taking some spray paint and hitting this up, and then when I pull it out, there'll be a line exactly where it needs to go, because this isn't just perfectly straight, it's a little bit of an angle. And that's the thing with the Maxim Motorsports aluminum rack bushings. They have a concave washer that goes in there, so everything sits nice and even and it doesn't twist your rack, because they know that this isn't always in the same plane. It's also not always even. So I'm gonna try something different and hit it up with some paint, and then pull them out and see if I get a good, line that I can see. Okay, if it's not a perfectly straight line, then I'll cut it to however it needs to be, so it lines up exactly with that K-member, and then grind it back a little bit so it's recessed slightly. Gonna let that dry and see if it gives me the effect that I want, or if I don't like it, well, it gives me some fresh paint to draw, scribe a line on. So I taped the line right there, and gonna cut off this part. So need to grind that off. We'll see how that fits. To the driver's side. Alright, here's the passenger side. Got it taped off where the line was from the paint. And I viced it in that side, that way I don't mess up. It's got this line in there and I don't want to pinch that and cause it to where it fits different than when I marked it. So I got it clamped on the side that I'm actually cutting off.
what you did.
Bushing sleeves are in there and cut down and used a flat disc, and you can just grab your fingernail so they're recessed just a little bit. Get your fingernail and it'll catch it. So that's what they were asking for, not to be flush but recessed slightly. Same over here. So that's exactly what you're looking for. Gonna start working on the steering, and I am running out of daylight. I gotta try to get this thing done by the end of March, and it's the end of February, so I gotta work at night, but it doesn't make for a good opportunity to make videos. Don't have a lot of time to make the videos, and of course with it getting dark it makes it tougher, so I need to get something put together here and figured, okay, I'll go over the basics of the steering, setting up the rack and everything, and then the finer details I'll pick up on that on later when I got time. Finer details including like measuring the rack travel, and bump steer and setting that stuff up. But this is just how the kit is assembled basically. So first you're going to get rid of, don't use the squishy rubber. This one's actually just rock hard pretty much. I already took out the other rubber bushings, so that just causes play. I like to clean this out with a round file and then use a flat file on the face here just to make sure everything is nice and flat. You can see how sometimes these things get hit and that can ding the aluminum and make it a little bit out of round. So using a round file, you can get that to where, you know, you'll be able to get the bushings, the aluminum bushings in. And what I've got is the Maxim Motorsports aluminum bushing kit and the Jan Duncan spacer kit. I suggest just picking this up. Both of these are extremely cheap and worth getting the rack spaced correctly, and also having it solid mounted so there's not a bunch of slack in it. The Maxim Motorsports kit, the way it's designed, it won't put your rack in a bind and cause it to crack. Haven't had any problems with it. The Jan Duncan kit comes with the bolt and this aluminum spacer. I just like to add a washer to it, so if you got a washer you can use it. If you don't, it'll probably be fine. And then the Maxim Motorsports kit comes with this washer, this spacer right here, and of course these two bushings and the zinc plated washer. And then you're going to reuse your nut, your original nut. And when it's on there, it's basically going to be set up like this. That washer slides into that bushing. That's the back side going towards the K member, and there's your spacer. So it's gonna be set up just like that. Let's see. I like to put a little anti-seize right here and here, just that way if I ever have to service it or anything, you know, it's not getting seized in there. A little Loctite on the inner tie rods, and the tie rods will most likely need to be cut. That'll be something else I'll go into later. Right now I have this threaded all the way in and bottomed out. I have my Heim on there with about 5 threads showing. There is here's like the old one. you can see there's about an inch or more threaded into the bump steer kit, the bump steers, you know, piece. That's also part of the WISEFOX kit, is that bump steer. This one's round. Some of them are, you know, a hex shape. So just depending on what they had and what they send you. So yeah, leave yourself about 5 threads there. And I will run a boot, but seeing how I will end up measuring the rack travel and possibly needing to cut this, I just mock it up first and see how everything is fitting, and then when I'm sure that everything is right, I'll pull this off and put the dust boot back on there. So the other thing, make sure you take out the rack spacer. So if you ever heard of the, you know, what's the cheapest, you know, angle mod, that's removing this rack spacer. And where that goes is on inside of here. So sometimes these might be stuck up against inside the rack. You can, you know, when you turn the rack and you see this come and extend out, you might not see this on there. It might be stuck in there. Well, if you're doing an angle kit, you need to get rid of that. Again, there's a measurement for rack travel. You don't want it to be any more than 6 inches. So if it is more than 6 inches, you can, you know, basically make a shim out of this, cut it down and make a shim out of that. But usually I don't have any problems. I've always found it to be just slightly less than 6 inches, which is right where you want it. I guess I'm going to mock this thing up. So, of course, it needs to be tightened down, but it's pretty straightforward and simple. You can see that spacer there, the other one. And you do want to make sure that the bushing is not hitting anywhere on the K-member. So I have just a gap right there and another gap right there. So again, just check your clearances, make sure nothing is touching, and when I tighten this up, that'll raise that up a little bit off of there. So no worries there. And this stuff is this is kind of basic, you know, inner tie rod. Again, I will put Loctite on this when I get everything how I like it. But usually you have to cut these a little bit. And I just usually go with whatever's cheap on Amazon. These are MOOG. I don't use the set rivets or screws that they give you, just Loctite and get them tight. Never had any problems with them coming loose. One thing you do see a lot of pictures when people install these, they'll have this bolt upside down. It doesn't go like that. Bolt head on top. Again, I like to add a washer up there. I don't know, I'm obsessed with washers, but they just spread the load, and I tend to use them where I think they're appropriate. And just real quick, what I found as far as this hardware is included in the kit, the angle kit, and what I found with the bump steer is the lower this your tie rod is, the less bump steer it has. So if you run this way up here, you're going to have increased bump steer. The lower it is, you're going to have less bump steer. So the way I run it is that 1 inch spacer, and then what is this, 1/4 inch spacer, and that's basically just low enough to where the nylon part of this nut will still grab onto the threads. Of course, I'm going to use a new nut. Like I said, this is all swapped over from another car. So that's as low as I can get it with the threads still locking in. So that's where I choose to run it. I mean, you might be able to add another spacer and Loctite this, but I don't really experience any crazy bump steer. I don't feel anything excessive. Yeah, make sure the nut goes on the downside and the bolt stays here. I mean, if any of this comes loose, that's why I was just checking to see if this would actually drop down and fall off. If this does come loose, you have a chance of this actually staying on even if the nut comes loose. And worst case scenario, it does come off, the car stops, you still have your bolt there. It's probably not going to jump out of there. But if you flip this upside down and it comes loose, it's guaranteed the bolt's falling out and you're losing steering. So yeah, bolt head up top, nut on the bottom. And of course, we'll make sure the rack is centered. If the rack is centered and these are bottomed all the way out and this is still towed in, then you won't have to cut them, because at that point you're just going to adjust it and get it towed straight ahead. Or if you wanted a little toe in, a little toe out, you have that measurement and you don't have to cut them. Sometimes you have to cut them. And the main reason, I guess, I mean, besides obviously the steering geometry, the science stuff for spacing the rack forward makes these inner tie rods last way longer. You can get a good season of hard driving without the racks spaced. You're probably going to wear the inners out. But if you space it, I mean, long-term testing, I'm going to do the second season on a set, so that's more than a year so far, just after spacing the rack. Okay, get these threads to catch. Eventually. 2 hands. Yeah, I'm not used to have to sit here and videotape using one hand to work and one hand to hold a camera. I guess there's better ways to video, but I don't have, time is not on my side. It's a luxury I do not have. So 1 inch. If you get your kit, you might be wondering, I guess this is a good time to go over what bolt you're going to be using right here for, you know, your steering, the front control arm mount, rear control arm mount bolt. This is going to be your shortest bolt. For the steering is going to be the shortest bolt. The medium length bolt, the one in the middle, that's going to go in the front of the K-member, and then the longest bolt is going to be for the rear. So you can see, you know, maybe a 1/2 inch of thread there. Of course, I am using washers. You know, there's just 1 or 2 threads showing there, and then when this is assembled, there's not going to be, you know, any threads showing. So short, medium, long. Alright, so that is on there now. Steering shaft. This is my first time going to be using the Maxim Motorsports solid steering shaft. I've always been running just the original steering shaft with a rag joint, but factory steering shaft with a rag joint is pretty old, can have some slop in it. So I mean, you can make your own of these. Again, I don't have a lot of time, so I ended up just hitting the easy button and spending the damn money on a Maxim Motorsports solid steering shaft. Haven't had any problems with the rag joints, but I've heard of, you know, people, them breaking or coming loose, and I rather just, while I'm here, go ahead and take care of it. Alright, steering shaft is hooked up, and the steering wheel is already locked. So the steering shaft is on there, and the steering is locked basically in the straight ahead position, and that is way towed in. And so is this side. So I'm okay with that. So both sides are towed in. The steering rack is centered. The steering wheel is locked straight ahead, at least close. You can see the gap right there. It could go passenger side just a hair more, but either way, that means it could come passenger a little bit, What that means is I don't have to cut my inner tie rods. So when I ballpark it, I'll just adjust it just like this so I can keep my threads right there for my final alignment. And obviously, yes, I need to put my Loctite on, tighten up my inner tie rod, and put my boots on. The dust boots. Yeah, that's nice. If you don't have to cut them, then it's just even better. Alright, so that's where I'm gonna leave off. I mean, it's pretty simple. The instructions for Maxim Motorsports, you can follow them, and all their instructions are also on their website. You can check them out even before you buy anything. So yeah, you're following their instructions, except you're just adding Jan Duncan's rack spacer and his longer bolt, and then everything else just stacks on that, just like the Maxim Motorsports instructions say, just if you didn't have them. And I guess in a pinch, I've run polyurethane bushings and then the factory bolt, and just stacked large washers, and until I could get, you know, I could get the nut on there, and it would be engaged, like only this much would be left, and that really helped, and it did work out. But this is the best way to do it. But either way, you should space your rack forward and get rid of, at least in the very least, have polyurethane bushings, and you know, you might have be able to get a 1/4 inch of washers spaced at 1/4 of an inch. This is about 3/4 of an inch spaced forward. So yeah, I'll finish assembling what I can tonight, and then I'll go over all the specific stuff next time.